Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. It is May 7th. I am your host, Tommy Brzee, as always, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about some of the changes that are going on in college football. It feels like I've been breaking down something new every single day, so I want to give you guys kind of a one-stop shop segment to get you updated on all of the changes that could be coming down the road and are definitely coming this upcoming year. And then I want to get into a little bit of the offseason talk. The majority of the offseason is over, the big time parts of it at least. So I want to get into kind of who won the offseason, at least so far. I have 4 teams for you today, but there are plenty more that I'll get to throughout the week. Then we'll get back into spring overreactions. We did this last week with the SEC. Now it's on to the Big Ten. I have a couple of teams that I want to break down some of my spring overreactions from. And then we'll finish it off with another Top 10 Tuesday, and we'll do the best commitments from this past spring cycle. There were tons of big-time talented players that found their way to new schools, so I want to break down some of my favorite of the group. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your questions on the screen, have kind of a fun interactive experience here, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to kind of have a fun interactive experience here. You get to get involved in the show, so if you do want to leave a question or a comment, use that link, gsmcpodcast.net. But let's jump right in and let's talk about all of the changes that are going on around college football. It has been all over the place for the last little bit, whether it's cases that are popping up every now and then against the NCAA or different conferences. We have rule changes coming up this year. We have a playoff expansion that might turn into more playoff expansion down the road, possible bowl expansion. So I want to kind of give you guys a one-stop shop breakdown essentially everything that's going on in the sport. Now, there are tons of stuff that are behind the scenes or tons of stuff that just could not fit in a 15-minute segment, so this might be a recurring thing, but overall kind of give you a 50,000 feet type of view of what's going on in the sport and kind of what is coming down the barrel, I guess is the best way to put it. So let's break down this, and let's start with the stuff that is kicking off this year. I felt like we could break this up kind of into 3 portions. So we have the ones that are starting this year that we know are changes coming, and then kind of ones coming down the road, possibly some ideas that are being thrown out there, and then we'll get into the 2 big-time cases that are kind of around the NCAA right now, although there are plenty more that are still kind of festering under the surface there. But let's start with the ones that are kicking off in 2024, and let's start with the rule changes, because those are the easiest to wrap our head around, to be totally fair. First, they're adding a 2-minute warning to the game. This is something that has been in the NFL for quite some time. It sounds like that will not affect the amount of commercial breaks. That's what I was going for. The amount of commercial breaks in these games. Now, I am very skeptical of that, I'll be totally honest, but at the end of the day, I felt like this was kind of an inevitability and not necessarily an issue I'm super upset about by any means. And then you have the big one, the in-helmet communication being introduced into college football. It's one player on either side of the ball that can have it for each team. They'll have a green dot on their helmet, so you'll hear that a lot. You say he's the green dot player or whatever it is. That will be kind of how you denote who has the speaker in their helmet and who is speaking to probably the play caller on either side of the ball. This is something that I think offensive play callers are going to love. This is something that I think when you can have the ability to be in your quarterback's ear up until 15 seconds left on the play clock or until the snap, whichever of those happens first, I think it's a huge advantage. I do think it'll speed up the pace of play a bit. Some teams that already went fast are going to be even more confident going fast in the future. So definitely will be a very interesting thing to watch. Those 2 rule changes, the 2-minute warning, pretty benign. The helmet communications could transform Saturdays for quite some time. So it'll be really interesting to watch that one. And then playoff expansion, one of the biggest things that has been going on, and one of the things that, fans are a little bit split on, but at the end of the day, we are moving to 12 teams this year. It is going to be the 4 top conference champions. We'll get the top 4 seeds in an automatic bye. So let's say Utah wins the Big 12, and they are the 8th team in the country. Well, they're the 4 seed in the playoff. That's just kind of the way that they're doing things. Not my favorite way, I'll be totally honest, but that is the format that they're going into 2024 with. And we'll get into kind of what the future of that might look like here in the next part of this. But I think it's going to be really interesting to watch. You have the Group of 5 team, the highest champion of a Group of 5 conference, will be in as well, probably as the 12 seed if I had to guess, but could sneak up a little bit further. And then you have the 7 at-large team from pretty much any of the other conferences. Likely the Power 4 will get those 7 bids, but maybe a Group of 5 team pops in there, who knows. But that is kind of the overall structure of the playoff that's coming up that has been a huge topic of conversation. And then finally, conference realignment. It's going to be a huge part of 2024, a ton of talking points going into this one. Texas and OU joining the SEC. We will get into kind of how ready either of these teams are probably sometime later this week, maybe into next week, just to give you an idea of how ready Texas is, how ready OU is to make that jump. Probably the same thing for Oregon, Washington, UCLA, and USC heading over to the Big Ten. Definitely a very different way of things, and we'll talk about Oregon a little bit later, honestly, about how they might fit into the Big Ten. And then you have the SMU, Stanford, and Cal heading over to the ACC. So not a ton of buzz around these teams in particular going into this year, but SMU is definitely a team that you should be watching very closely. I think they're more capable to make some noise in the ACC this upcoming year. And then you have Oregon State and Washington State will play a majority of a Mountain West schedule, as they were kind of left alone over there on the West Coast, but they are still the Pac-12. They are still trying to work their way back into being a big-time conference. So it'll be interesting to watch that, not only over this year, but the coming years as that kind of develops. But let's get into changes that are coming down the road, possibly. Now, there has been a ton of stuff that has been thrown out here, so these are kind of 3 big-time things that you should be watching for, at least in the next little bit. Playoff expansion has been a huge topic of conversation. We just talked about how they're moving from 4 to 12. Well, they thought about moving from 12 to 14 pretty much immediately. They have kind of stifled those conversations, at least for the time being, to let the 12 team kind of play out, see what that looks like, and then kind of reevaluate your options. But it seems like 14 is a very, very popular opinion around the group that is deciding all this. So I think it's possible that it's 14. 16 is also on the table with the Super League, which we'll get to here in a second. But I think for the most part, you will at some point see a 14-team playoff. I think after 2025, the rights for the 12-team playoff are kind of up for grabs, so I assume they will then come back to the table, or probably before then, to be totally honest, come back to the table and say, let's move to 14 teams. Now, the structure on that is kind of murky. There have been a ton of different ideas thrown out there, whether it's 5 auto bids, 6 auto bids, 7, it's all over the place, really, to be totally honest with you. So we'll break that down as it kind of comes, but that's definitely something to watch for as we move on into this season and obviously the offseason after the 12 team is played out. But let's get into kind of what the postseason might look like. I think there's been a lot of talk about bowl expansion, which we'll get to here in a second, but the Super League has been a huge topic of conversation. It's something that was thrown out there by a group of fairly powerful people in the college football and college sports world overall to kind of create a league that was the 70 Power 5 teams all together, and then the 10 Group of 5 teams that rotate in and out by promotion and relegation. So obviously a very, very interesting thing, something that has not been really utilized at all in college football is the promotion and relegation model that they have over in Europe for the soccer leagues over there. So it'd be very interesting to watch that kind of unfold. They would be 8-10 team divisions, likely split by geography. So I think that's a plus we can all get behind a little bit at least. And then the playoff would likely be 16 teams, where it would be the 8 division winners and then the 8 teams with the next best records among the, I guess it would be 72 left teams. The best 8 records from those teams would then join the playoff, and it would be a 16-team playoff, which frankly I think is probably the best landing point in general, whether it's the Super League or just normal playoff expansion. I think 16 probably makes the most sense, but we'll see what happens there. And then Group of 5 has talked about possibly breaking off into their own playoff, which kind of plays into the postseason idea with bowl expansion, where 2 of these things can coexist together, but it would definitely make it a little bit more complicated. So it's probably likely that you'll see one or the other, whether it's bowl expansion or the group of five breaking off into their own playoff. I've said it a time and again. I think that's a relatively good idea for the way that things are in the sport right now. The group of five just needs more of a pedestal to stand on, I suppose. More of a better games, bigger games on a weekly basis, and I think having a playoff that you're building towards would only help that. So I wish that didn't have to be segmented the way that it kind of has been over the last, decade or so. But at the end of the day, this is where we are, and I think a group of five playoff would be a very good thing. I think bowl expansion is a little bit down the road just because there are tons of things that need to get ironed out before they can get to that, but I do think it'll be really interesting to watch how the postseason kind of evolves over the next little bit. But let's get into what is the most confusing and probably the most consequential of all these changes, all of the court cases that have been going on around the country. And I'm going to focus in on two, and don't be confused, there are plenty more around the NCAA, in particular around NIL and employment and all of this different stuff that I'm sure we will be talking about ad nauseum. There has been a little bit of a wrench thrown into the works with the College Football Players Association not really being as big in favor of employment as some people might thought they would be. So it'll be kind of a weird, confusing time, but we'll try to keep you updated as best we can. But to give you an idea of where we sit right now, House versus or NCAA versus House has been something that we've talked on here a lot. I'm sure you have seen across your Twitter feed, or if you're scrolling around college football news, I'm sure you've seen this brought up. It's an NIL back pay case that essentially is meant to help out any former athletes that could have made money from NIL, whether that's from video games that they were a part of that they did not get compensated for, or just in general, being a part of a big time university and not getting paid at all for those services. There's a certain amount of people that want some paycheck at the end of all this. So it looks like that settlement is kind of coming down to it. It sounds like the settlement might be somewhere between 1 to 2.7 billion. So I know that's a massive gap, but it gives you an idea of just how confusing this process is and how quickly everything changes. So we'll figure out what that inevitably is, and hopefully for the NCAA it is not too high, but it's getting up there, and it'll be a very interesting thing to watch how they kind of handle that. But also it brings in likely a new NIL structure to college football, which is something I think all of us can get on board with, but this revenue structure does create some problems, right? We talked about it yesterday with all of the implications of it, and you can go back and look at that to get a little bit more in depth, but the revenue sharing will be roughly 15 to 25 million annually per school. That's something that a lot of schools cannot handle, so that's going to be a very interesting number to watch. Will it be the same for Power 5 and Group of 5? I tend to believe it shouldn't, but we'll see how kind of all that shakes out. And then there's been a ton of push around employment and trying to get these guys contracts. That is something that is a little bit more murky today than it was even a week ago, so still a lot of confusion there, still a lot of things to be ironed out on that front. And then there's this idea that the contracts, or whatever form it takes in NIL in the future, will have a clause that will hopefully curb opt-outs in the postseason and bowl games, because you'll have to probably sign a contract where it says you'll play 12 regular season games and a postseason game, and so essentially you can't opt out unless, obviously injury or things of that nature come into play. So it'll be really interesting to watch that unfold. That's the most consequential thing happening in college football right now, and not only college football, college sports, because there's a reality where, depending on what that final number is for revenue sharing, some sports that are not called college football will fall by the wayside fairly quickly, and obviously you don't want that to happen, but it's feeling more and more like an inevitability, which really, really stinks. But let's get to ACC versus Florida State and Clemson. Now, they're not fighting Florida State and Clemson together by any means, but Florida State has its own case, and then Clemson another, actually two others, which we'll get to here in a second. Florida State is fighting the ACC on the grounds that essentially the ACC has not been doing a good job of keeping up with the other conferences in terms of just their value to to college football. And I think a lot of this started in 2016 when they signed the deal with ESPN for 20 years and essentially buried themselves, to be totally honest with you, with the way that TV deals and everything is expanding just exponentially over the last little bit. I thought it was very, very foolish to sign yourself into a deal that is that long that would never really be able to keep up with the incredible amount of time, the incredible times we're in, the incredible what word am I looking for? Acceleration, I suppose, of all of this media rights deals and everything becoming more and more expensive and being a bigger and bigger part of the pie. That I think Florida State just felt like that contract, as well as some other things the ACC has done throughout the last couple of years, has just put the conference and them in turn at a very, very bad spot. Now, Clemson is fighting them over the grant of rights exit fee. They don't believe that it is fair. They also don't believe that they should have to pay the ACC anything after they leave the ACC. They don't think they owe them anything beyond that moment. The ACC is arguing the opposite, that if you want to leave the conference, you have to pay us. Even if you are already out of the conference, there will be a certain amount that you have to get back to the ACC. So there's a ton of stuff going on here. It's going to be very confusing. Clemson actually filed a suit that against the ACC, saying that the way that they had approached these conversations about the grant of rights and getting out of that and what the payment would be like have been essentially just a little bit fudged, I suppose is the best way to put it. Essentially saying that the ACC has made this a bigger deal than it actually is, has made it seem like the grant of rights and everything is harder to get out of than it actually is, which in turn hurts Clemson's ability to find another conference after they finally get out of the ACC, because at the end of the day, no conference wants to deal with someone that is going to butt heads over and over with the big-time people in that conference. So it'll be really interesting to watch how that one unfolds. Clemson is probably on a little bit better of footing today than Florida State is in these proceedings, but things have been changing so fast, so it'll be really, really interesting to watch. Now, all of this stuff is moving relatively slow right now. That's kind of just the way that court cases go, but we'll update you with as, more and more things go on and as kind of all of this craziness comes to an head, because it feels like there's a million different things happening that will affect the future of college football, and there's going to be a lot of answers coming pretty soon. I just don't know how soon, to be totally honest with you, but it's going to be wild. I think the change over the next 5 to 10 years in college football are going to be probably bigger than any we have seen in the history of the sport, if I'm being totally honest. There have been a ton of conference realignment in the past. There have been rule changes. There have been scholarship changes and changes the way of roster construction and the transfer portal, a million different changes in college football. I think we're going to get to a point where the outright structure, the way that NIL works, the way that payment works, the way that college football works overall is going to change drastically over the next 5 years. And there's a reality where we get to a point where it is in a great spot, where we have the employment or the payment structure, whatever that looks like, fully in place. We have the new structure fully in place, whether that's the Super League or just a better configuration of the conferences or whatever it is. Once we have all of that in place, I do think we can get to a place as a sport where it looks fantastic. It's a fantastic amalgamation of being a professional sport, utilizing some things from the NFL while still keeping what makes college football, which is the pageantry, everything inside the stadium staying the exact same, not losing some of the big-time regional matchups that, some have fallen by the wayside, but hopefully we can find our way back to those. It just feels like it's going to be a rocky road, I do think, but as long as the right people are steering the ship, which has been not the case in the past, I'll be totally honest with you, but it sounds like more and more people who I fully trust with the future of the sport are starting to step up to the plate, and it'll be an interesting 5 years, or it'll be an interesting decade, to be totally honest with you. But I do think we're going to come out the other side and have a sport that at the very least is stable, which is something that I think all of us would take in a heartbeat right now. So it'll be fascinating to watch all of this unfold. The changes around college football have been, frankly, really hard for me to keep up with, and I kind of live and breathe this sport 24/7, so I can't even imagine what it's been like to kind of just scroll through Twitter and see all of this stuff that's coming from 10 different directions. But wanted to give you guys kind of a one-stop shop, a place to come where just to get an idea of where we're at today. Now, all of this could change in a week, so we'll keep you updated on here as best we can, but that's just an idea of what's going on in college football and the change that is coming. But we're going to take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the offseason. And the bulk of the offseason is over. The part where, a lot of people win or lose the offseason is over at this point. So want to break down some of the big-time winners of this offseason. This is something that we'll revisit throughout the week, but I have 4 teams that I think you could probably say won it more than pretty much everyone else. So I'll get to that right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the face, yeah. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows or 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the changes coming to college football this year and down the road, kind of gave you guys a one-stop shop to get everything you could possibly need to know, at least at 50,000 feet type of view on everything, and make sure you guys are fully up to date on what's going on in college football. But let's get to some of the off-season winners. Obviously, we are not fully done with the off-season, but once you get to the end of spring ball, you're pretty much intact. Whether it's from a coaching perspective or from a roster perspective, you're pretty much at the point that you want to be at as a team. So there are a couple of teams that I want to highlight here that I think have done just an incredible job in the portal, in hiring new coaches when some found their way elsewhere, and just setting themselves up for success this upcoming year. And I think it's got to start with Oregon. Now, I understand Ohio State has done plenty, and we will get to them later, I promise you that. But Oregon has done just a remarkable job under the first 2 years and then going into the third year with Dan Lanning. Obviously, last year was spoiled by Washington a couple of times, and they were very, very close to winning both of those games. So it's one of those things that I know Dan Lanning has been sitting for quite some time, kind of stewing on that, and does not want that to be the case this upcoming year. So he did plenty to make sure that didn't happen, and a lot of it was done in the portal. He had probably the best portal class of the entire country. I think that almost might not be an argument, to be totally honest with you. So on the defensive side of the ball, that's where he did, I think, his best work. Yeah, barring, adding the 2 quarterbacks and everything they did on the offensive side of the ball. You add Jamari Caldwell, you add Derek Harmon, who will be one of the best defensive tackle duos in the country, might be the best behind Mason Graham and Chris Jenkins. I won't do that to them because I think they are on a little bit of a league of their own, but Oregon is right there with them. Then you add in someone like Jabbar Muhammad, who was one of the best corners in the entire country a year ago, probably could have gone to the NFL draft and been drafted, but decided to come back to school. You have Kobe Savage on that back end coming over from Kansas State. You have Brandon Johnson coming from Duke, who's a fantastic nickelback, one of the best in the country, among plenty others. Peyton Woodyard just committed, who could be a player for them this year, although I think probably will be somewhat rotational at first and then work his way into a starting role because this kid is just off the charts talented. And then you get into the offense, and you got the two quarterbacks they brought in, which is just insane, and Dylan Gabriel and Dante Moore, both just remarkably talented guys that started a year ago that you somehow were able to pull in, and I think they'll feel more than fine about quarterback going forward. Not just these two guys, but plenty of guys they have on that roster can play. So I think they'll be good up there for quite some time at that position. But then you add in Evan Stewart and Matthew Bedford. Evan Stewart, obviously the very talented wide receiver coming over from Texas A&M. Matthew Bedford making his way over from Indiana. This offensive line is a little bit of patchwork with some of the portal guys, but still a ton of talent on that offensive line. Not super worried about what they can be there. Put all of that together with Tez Johnson coming back, Mateo Uiagalelei and Jordan Birch taking that next step that they're definitely capable of being. Then you add in guys like Jordan James, who's ready to step up into that RB1 spot with Bucky Irving walking out the door. And then you have Gatlin Bair and Elijah Rushing coming into the program as freshmen. Everything is all systems go for Oregon. Everything is in place. There are very few holes on this team. I'll probably do a little bit more of an in-depth breakdown maybe tomorrow on Spotlight Wednesday about them, just because this team is downright scary, and they can come into a new league where a lot of people are a little skeptical of what they can do in this league and just knock the door down in year one. So they're really fascinating to watch. They've done incredible work, and Dan Lanning is building something up there that not only is, going to be great in 2024, but he's setting himself up to be great in 2028. So it's just incredible what he's doing up there. But let's move on to a SEC team here in Ole Miss. I think they have done an incredible job, and the portal has been as kind to them as pretty much anyone not named Oregon. They have gotten a ton of great players from the portal. Now, did lose Quinshon Judkins, who obviously is a big-time player for them, who actually went to the team that we'll talk about here in a second in Ohio State. But with Ole Miss, you added guys like Walter Nolan, Princely Uman-Mielen. You add Isaiah Hamilton late on in the process, Trey Amos on that back end, Brandon Turnage, another one. So that defense really was built out from a talent perspective. Now, all of this needs to be put together by Pete Golding, obviously. But at the end of the day, this talent level compared to last year might be the biggest jump of any side of the ball of any team in the entire country, to be totally honest with you. At least from a talent perspective, the results will obviously show themselves in the fall, but this team has just done work on the defensive side of the ball in the portal. And then you have Henry Parrish coming in, you have Logan Diggs to kind of ease that blow of losing Quinshon Judkins to Ohio State. And then you have Ulysses Bentley in that running back room as well. Just a very dynamic group. You add Juice Wells to a receiving core with Trey Harris and Caden Priestcorn. It's just outright unfair. And then add all of that together into having a third-year starter in Jackson Dart. It's going to be beautiful. This offense is a very nuanced one. Lane Kiffin does not necessarily make it super easy on his quarterbacks, at least from a learning the playbook perspective. Once you've learned it, you can roll, and it's going to be very easy on you. But learning it is definitely a very tall task. Jackson Dart has done really well over his first couple of years, but I think this is the year where he just flips that other switch and kind of goes to that next level, and there's all types of momentum around this team heading into this year. There is a spot there in Atlanta if they play their cards right. Definitely have to win some games that in the past they just haven't won under Lane Kiffin, but they're ready to take that step forward, whether that's making Atlanta and losing in the SEC championship, whether that's winning the SEC, whether that's making the playoff, winning a title, I don't know, but there's tons of talent on this team, and really nothing is off limits for this Ole Miss team based on what they did this offseason. But let's move on to the other team we were just talking about, Ohio State. They picked up Quinshon Judkins in the portal, but to me, Ohio State is the offseason champions for whatever that's worth. I'm sure Buckeye fans don't care much about that, to be totally honest with you, but I do think they won it not because of what happened in the portal, but because of what happened all over the place. They did essentially everything right this offseason. Adding Chip Kelly to the staff as OC is one of the biggest moves of this entire offseason across all of college football. And it kind of fell into their lap a little bit with Bill O'Brien being hired as the head coach over at Boston College. But at the end of the day, this is one of the best play callers in the entire country. You're giving him the ability to just coach football and not do the NIL, not do the aggressive recruiting. He'll still be a part of it, but not nearly as aggressive as he was in the past. With someone like Brian Hartline, you have that ability to do that. So adding him is just an embarrassment of riches on the offensive side of the ball when you come to that coaching room. And then you have guys like JT, you have Jack Sawyer, you have Denzel Burke, Tommy Eichenberg, Lathan Ransom, plenty more coming back on that defensive side of the ball. I think they can be one of, if not the best defense in the entire country, and I'll get to a big piece that came in here in a bit. But then on the offensive side of the ball, Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate, Brendan Ennis, all ready to take that next step forward. We talked about Quinshon Judkins joining Travion Henderson, which made them the best running back duo in the entire country, period. I mean, that duo is just absolutely insane, and the portal was plenty kind to the Buckeyes. They did not necessarily struggle there by any means. You added Will Howard, their likely starter at quarterback this upcoming year, a guy they have high hopes for, just need to play better football than they had a year ago at quarterback, so hopefully he can do that. We talked about Judkins, an absolutely huge pickup for them. Another huge addition was Caleb Downs. This is a dude that I've talked about, ad nauseum on here, big fan of his, and I think he just transforms that defense into one that has, the ability to be the best defense in the country to the one I would likely bet on to be the best defense in the country. They are absolutely stacked at essentially every single level of this defense, and then having someone like Caleb Downs kind of in the back end to be the security blanket, to be the guy that saves you in sometimes is a very, very good luxury. And then you brought in probably your likely starting center in Seth McLaughlin from Alabama. Didn't have the greatest year with Bama last year, but it sounds like a change of scenery has helped him a lot. And then Julian Sayin is another guy they brought in from the portal from Alabama. Probably won't play this year, but down the road, this dude is going to be a star for Ohio State. I feel very good about that. Add all that together to probably what is the best offensive or the best freshman in the entire country in Jeremiah Smith. Dude is going to be an absolute star, and this team is just set up as well as you could possibly hope. And Ryan Day knows that, and he has to deliver, and it's going to get really awkward in Columbus if he does not. So that'll be really interesting to watch. They've done an incredible job of setting themselves up for success, but the job is not nearly started, to be totally fair. Once it starts, then we'll get an idea of what happens with Ohio State. But then, finally, let's finish it off with Texas. I think when we talk about Texas, it's a little bit more of the Ohio State way of things. The portal was plenty kind to them, which I'll get to here in a second, but they did a ton of really good things this offseason. Bringing in Johnny Nansen from UCLA was a huge pickup after all of that kind of went a little bit haywire over there. And was it Arizona, he brought him in from. But a great pickup from them. Obviously, replacing Bo Davis was a terrible, terrible thing they had to do because that's the best defensive line coach in the entire country, if you were to ask me. But getting Kenny Baker, it seems like that has gone off to a really, really good start there. But the team is really, really set up for success. You have Quinn Ewers coming back as a 3-year starter. We talked about it with Jackson Dart. Same applies to Quinn Ewers. He should be ready to absolutely roll, fill the massive shoes that he came into college with, being the perfect high school recruit and all of this type of hype. He, has slowly gotten better, and last year was a very good year for him, but there's another place for him to go. There's another step for him to take, and it'll be really interesting to see if he can take that. You have a duo of CJ Baxter and Jaden Blue in the backfield that is going to be just incredible pretty much week in and week out. One of the most experienced and talented offensive lines in the entire country. Kelvin Banks, one of the best tackles and just outright offensive linemen in the entire country. And then on defense, you bring back guys like Alfred Collins and Vernon Broughton, who are set to step into some big-time shoes with Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy walking out the door. Manny Muhammad is going to burst onto the scene on the back end, I think, along with Anthony Hill, who's just a remarkable linebacker that could honestly be the best player on this Texas defense, and maybe the best player on this Texas team this upcoming year. And then the portal was plenty kind to Texas as well. They had a ton of receivers to replace with Xavier Worthy, A.D. Mitchell, and Jordan Whittington walking out the door, along with Jatavian Sanders, a very talented pass-catching tight end, walking out the door. But they got Isaiah Bond, they got Matthew Golden, they got Silas Bolden, and in a room that had 8 catches when all of those guys left for the NFL draft, now they have plenty of experience and plenty of guys that have great football behind them, but also great football in front of them. You added Amari Nyblack as a kind of someone to fill that pass-catching void for Jatavion Sanders. Probably won't be that level of player, but still will definitely be able to help out that void a little bit. And then you have younger guys, Jonte Cook, DeAndre Moore, ready to take that next step in the wide receiver room. There's so many talented guys in this, especially in this receiving room, that it's going to be tough to cover all of them. I'll be totally honest with you. I expect to see a lot more 10 personnel, which is essentially just 4 wide receivers split out across the field, just because I think that's the best way for Texas to keep defenses on their toes. But it'll be really interesting to watch all that. And then we talked about all the guys leaving, and that could be a huge negative in a lot of ways. But it turned out to be a positive for Texas because it turned into a program record of players drafted in a single class for the NFL draft with 11. So Sark entirely flipped not only the win-loss breakdown for Texas, but also the way that people view them from the outside. I mean, for the past real decade, it's been a really tough stretch for them in the NFL draft, just not getting the players there that they absolutely needed to. And when Sark came into town, you felt that everything was moving in the right direction, but this is proof that it really was. 11 guys getting drafted, being the second team on that board behind Michigan is an absolutely huge thing for them going forward. So ton of work still left to do for Texas. The pressure just got ratcheted up a lot, being in the position that they are right now, but I think they're more than capable of delivering in the SEC in year one. It'll be interesting to see how they respond to all of the things that are going on around them and all of the pressure that is mounting very quickly. But more on this to come for sure, just because those are not the only guys that won the offseason. There were plenty other teams that did incredible work, and then we'll get into some teams that had a little bit of a tough offseason, whether it's from a roster construction where a lot of their guys left. Michigan State got absolutely gutted this past portal, so it'll be really interesting to break all that down, but we'll come back to that throughout the week. But we're going to take our second break here, and when we come back, we'll do spring overreactions. We did SEC last week. We'll do Big Ten this week, and we'll break down some overreactions from some of the top teams in the Big Ten before we get to that Top 10 Tuesday to finish off the show. So stick with us, and we'll be right back with that.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about a little bit of an update on who kind of won the offseason so far. Obviously, we are through the bulk of the offseason where a lot of the moves are happening, whether that's roster moves or coaching moves. So we're kind of at a standstill, at least for a little bit here. So I wanted to break down some of the winners for you thus far, but let's get into some spring overreactions. And we'll go to the Big Ten this time around, and we'll probably do another Big Ten one because there's tons of teams that I did not get a chance to get to, but we got some of the big boys in this one. So let's start with Penn State, and let's start with Abdul Carter. I think he is one of the most impressive players in the entire country. I think if you take out Travis Hunter, you'd be really hard-pressed to find a more dynamic, more versatile defender in the entire country. That's why they moved him from linebacker to edge rusher this offseason, because he can be anywhere on the field and he'll make plays. You could put him at deep safety and he'd somehow find a way to make a play. The dude is just out of this world talented, and I think that could make for a year that Penn State fans have not seen since Micah Parsons. And I understand that is very lofty goals. Micah Parsons was an absolute game wrecker, both rushing the passer and just blowing up pretty much every single play down after down, but this kid has every ability to be an absolute game wrecker this year. He can rush the passer, he can drop into coverage, makes tons of tackles, can do pretty much everything you need him to do on the field. And on top of all that, he is going to be the emotional leader of this team. He will likely be the guy with the green dot, although they might give it to one of the really talented linebackers they have there as well, because he is on the edge, a little bit harder to communicate, but we'll see what happens there. He did have 6.5 sacks and 10.5 tackles for loss a year ago, so the dude can absolutely rush the passer. He just didn't do it all the time a year ago, and I probably think he'll be in a little bit more of a hybrid spot this year as well, but definitely more pass rushing opportunities, so just give him more opportunities, and he is going to burst onto the scene. I can promise you that. But this Penn State defense, I do think, is going to be very good. That being said, they did lose a ton of players from a year ago, and there is going to be a little bit more emphasis on the big dogs to make a ton of the plays. And Abdul Carter is as big of a dog as they have in that room. So when you had Chop Robinson, Nadisa Isaac, and Kalen King, and Johnny Dixon, and all of these guys that were making remarkable plays across the field, there was less on you, obviously. But now, not that they're going to be bad by any means. I think A.J. Harris is going to be a great player for them in the back end. I think they have plenty of talent on that team, but I do think Abdul Carter will have a little bit more on his shoulders, and I think he's someone that is going to take that in stride. I don't think he's ever going to be someone to shy away from a competition, shy away from a challenge, and this is a big challenge, but I think he's more than capable of doing it. I think the versatility mixed with him just needing to be the guy on this team, I think he's going to be one of, if not the best defensive player in the entire country. I think he will go top 10 in the NFL draft. I can't say enough about this kid. I think he's just out of this world talented and has every ability to not only be a fantastic player this year, but go on and have a remarkable career in the NFL. But let's move on to Michigan and talk about Sherrone Moore, because the big topic of conversation to start the offseason was Jim Harbaugh moving on to the NFL, taking a lot of people with him, and the Michigan program just kind of being in a spot where I'm sure Michigan fans were plenty confident in their guy, no doubt about that, but I do think there was a little bit of worry, right? There's a little bit of a question of, can you keep up what has been going on over the last couple of years, because it's very important to. But Sherrone Moore has been there for the past 6 years. He has been learning from Harbaugh. He has seen how Harbaugh wants Michigan to work and how Michigan works in the best capacity, which is, we're going to punch you in the teeth, and we're going to do it over and over and over again until you quit, essentially, is the way that they've been going about business since Harbaugh showed up. And I think it's going to be more of the same with Sherrone Moore. I think he is more than capable of having a team that is as hard-nosed as Jim Harbaugh had, partly because I think Jim Harbaugh just instilled that in him over the last 6 years. Now, Sherrone Moore has plenty of accomplishments behind him, where he was one of the most accomplished assistants in all of college football. He had multiple Joe Moore award-winning offensive lines when he was the O-line coach. He won 4 games as the interim coach a year ago, obviously, including Penn State and Ohio State, the 2 games that you got to win if you're a Michigan coach. So he, in my mind, has been a head coach for quite some time, or at least been ready to be a head coach for quite some time, but just has had the position of OC because the guy in front of him was one of the best coaches we have seen in quite some time in this sport. So I think he is now the big guy. He's now, taking over the reins. I think he's more than ready to go. The approach will be the exact same on offense. They're going to run the ball down your throat. It might even be more aggressive with Alex Orji taking over at quarterback. And then the defense is going to be just insane. This defense is really remarkable from top to bottom, even with all of the guys that they lost. I think they're just going to wreak havoc. So it's going to be the same Michigan. I promise you that. It'll have some ers and ahs in there. It won't be the same press conferences and that type of thing, but it'll be the same formula for winning, and I think Sherrone Moore will handle it more than fine, to be totally honest with you. But let's move on to Ohio State And let's talk about the man that has taken over spring ball in Jeremiah Smith. He has probably been the talk of the offseason after all of the coaching craziness with Nick Saban and Jim Harbaugh and all of that stuff. Once we got into spring ball, it was Jeremiah Smith highlights all over your Twitter page pretty much every single day. This kid, pretty much from the get-go, was big time on theatrics because obviously, if you remember at all, he had a very, very interesting recruitment. There were some signs that he might be signing with Miami down the stretch, so much so that during Ryan Day's press conference on signing day, he was asked about Jeremiah Smith, and actually he was told that Jeremiah Smith had finally signed with Ohio State. The dude almost collapsed to the ground, and some people thought that was a crazy reaction. Now that we've seen this kid play, it is not a crazy reaction. This kid is as talented as they come, and especially as being an 18-year-old, it's just insane what he can do on the football field. So he can get separation on intermediate and short routes, which is something that bigger built receivers tend to struggle with a little bit, but this kid doesn't seem to have much of a problem with it. He has some of the best hands I've seen as a freshman coming in, one of the best 50-50 guys on the team. I think he might be one of the best in the country next year, to be totally honest with you. I just think he's going to be as big a part of this team as anyone, and there's another part of this that kind of plays into why I think he could be the wide receiver one for Ohio State this upcoming year, and is the quarterback play. And obviously, I do think the quarterback play will be much better than it was a year ago. With Kyle McCord, I think it will be a much more consistent type of play, much more accurate week in, week out. But at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to be up to the Ohio State standards, which is incredibly lofty, to be fair. But at the end of the day, I do think there's going to be some times where you're just going to need to throw it up and hope that someone goes and gets it, and Jeremiah Smith is going to be that guy. So I think this kid is going to take the world by storm, and I think despite Ohio State having the best wide receiver room in the country, this might be the guy in 2024. But let's move on to Oregon, and let's talk about what they can do in the Big Ten. I think they are fully ready to just take over in their first year. We talked about everything that has been in place, the elite transfer portal class, talent on both sides of the ball, depths on both sides of the ball, which is something they've kind of struggled with during the first part of Dan Lanning's time there. The staff has been really solid for a while with a couple of adjustments happening over offseason, but at the end of the day, this is a team that can handle everything that the Big Ten is going to throw at them, whether it's fantastic passing games, whether it's the physicality that a lot of people are worried some of these teams coming over can't handle. Oregon can handle it. They have tons of physicality across that entire team. The D-line is going to be among the best in the country and in the conference in particular. And then Dillon Gabriel, I think, is the best quarterback for this offense. I think he can just sling the ball out to all of the playmakers he will have around him. Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart leading the way there, obviously. But then the running backs are awesome. The O-line is one of the best in the country. It's all there for them, and I think they're ready to kick down the door. Now, will they is a big question mark, but at the end of the day, I think if you're looking at a team ready to fully take over their conference in year one, I think you look no further than the Oregon Ducks. But finally, let's finish it off with a Nebraska prediction, and let's talk about Dylan Raiola. He is a guy that has been massively covered over the last little bit, whether it was decommitting from Georgia and going to Nebraska, being the kind of prodigal son returning and the savior of the program coming back, that type of talk that was going on around him, and he's ready for a big-time freshman season. He's done incredible things during this spring, has been a really, really good piece for them, and you're always a little bit worried when a freshman quarterback comes into the fray, but he's handled everything very, very well. I think this team overall is much better than people give them credit for, and will definitely be able to maybe surprise some people in some games throughout this year. Matt Rule has always taken a step forward year over year at every job he's been to. I expect that to happen again this year. I think it's possible he picks up even more momentum this year than he did in the past, second years with Temple and then with Baylor. They were making bowl games. I think they can win 8 to maybe even 9 games if things go really right. But Nebraska is going to be one of those teams that it feels like we've been wanting to talk about them for a long time, but they just haven't really given us a reason to. They keep losing these one-score games. They keep falling short of big-time expectations, so there's not really a big reason for them to be in the conversation in the Big Ten or in the national world. I think Dylan Raiola and this new Nebraska team will push them back into the conversation. Now, does that mean they're going to win the Big Ten? Does that mean they're going to go to the playoff? No, not by any means. But I do think when we go into the offseason and we start looking towards 2025, people are going to be looking at Nebraska not only as, a team that could make some noise, but a team that might just be a downright conference contender. So it'll be fascinating to watch this season unfold. I think this team is set up for more success than I think some people are expecting. But we'll find out what goes on with them. But that'll do it for this edition of the Overreaction segment. We will definitely get to more of that as the week goes on because there's tons across the country that you can pull from. So that's definitely a fun segment that we'll continue to do. But we're going to take our last break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the Top 10 Tuesday. Today we're going to do the biggest commitments of the spring portal cycle. There are some big-time guys that came off the board. Want to break down who I think has the biggest impact on their team, who I think was the biggest pickup, whether it's a position of need or just the outright talent of a player. So we'll break down that right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the spring overreactions coming from the Big Ten. Tons of stuff to pull away from the spring there. We will definitely continue that series throughout the week here. But let's get to a Top 10 Tuesday, and we'll talk about the best spring portal pickups. There were tons of guys that hit the portal, tons of defensive tackle talent, which a ton of teams needed, so that's a huge pickup for a lot of those teams. We had some big-time wide receivers. Running backs really were the ones that stole the show, though. So want to break down my top 10 guys, and it starts with a running back in Damian Martinez, and this is the biggest commitment to me, simply because this is the biggest, the best, the highest impact player on this list, in my opinion. I think this dude can totally transform what Miami does, not only on the offensive side of the ball, but just give them an ability that they didn't have before. I love what Mark Fletcher Jr. is capable of doing over there, but when you have a chance to get one of the best running backs in the country, you take it. And I think especially having him next to Cam Ward, it's going to be an absolutely incredible duo to watch. The O-line is going to be really, really good for Miami this year, led by Francis Mauanoa. And then you have a passing attack that should be mostly downfield. Xavier Restrepo, Jacoby George, they can all stretch the field and do really, really incredible things deep downfield. That just opens up tons of running lanes for a guy that will exploit those very, very aggressively from the get-go. So it'll be fascinating to watch all of this unfold and kind of see what happens with him. But when I look around this portal class in particular, I don't see anyone that will have a bigger impact on their team and possibly the entire conference that they're joining in the ACC than Damian Martinez over at Miami. And then I got Caden Proctor at 2. This is probably the best player, I suppose. I think he has the ability to be one of the best tackles in the entire country. I think he can do just remarkable things. I was a little hesitant to put him on here, to be totally honest, just because it was a little sojourn he took to Iowa. It was sort of a pickup. It was a pickup for the new staff that the old staff had locked down, so a very interesting process there. But this kid is outright talented. Bama needed some help on that tackle position, and he will absolutely be the starter, probably at right tackle, maybe at left tackle. It'll be interesting to watch what happens there. But a very talented kid that can do a remarkable amount of things. And if they're going to be a dominant team the way they need to be, they need guys like this on their offensive line. They're going to be running the ball a ton, I would assume. So gotta have guys that can push defensive linemen on their ass, essentially. So it'll be really interesting to watch that unfold. And then we get to the defensive tackles, which was the most highly sought after position in the entire portal class this last cycle, and Dominic Williams, in my opinion, was the best of the bunch. I think Oklahoma especially needed some players on the interior of that defensive line. They also added Jermaine Lowell from Louisville, so they did plenty of work there. But Dominic Williams is a guy that I think has the ability to play on Sundays in the future. I think he could be an all SEC level guy this upcoming year. He's just going to be huge for their team. They need to be stout against the run. Some of these rushing attacks are going to be insane in the SEC this upcoming year. You talk about Georgia, you talk about Texas, you talk about LSU with one of the best offensive lines in the entire country. There are so many great teams. Alabama, another one. So they're going to have to play some teams that are going to run the ball very aggressively, and we'll see if they can handle that. But adding Dominic Williams and Jermaine Lowell in that interior just helps that a lot. But then at 4, I have Keandre Lambert-Smith, the wide receiver that came from Penn State over to Auburn, and this one is a little bit more of I just think this guy makes the wide receiver room over at Auburn just make a little bit more sense. I think they have plenty of talent in that room, but the two headliners in that room are Cam Coleman, obviously, who had an incredible spring, and then you have Perry Thompson, who might just got onto campus, might be getting onto campus here pretty soon. But both those guys are freshmen, and you can only put so much on the shoulders of freshmen. So I think bringing in someone like Keandre Lambert-Smith, who led Penn State in receiving a year ago, was one of the biggest players for them, and has a lot of really good football behind him, I think it just really helps Peyton Thorne. It really helps this passing offense to fill in the gaps. I think Cam Coleman is going to be remarkably talented. I think Perry Thompson is going to be great, but they're going to make freshman mistakes. They're going to have a couple of drops here and there. They're going to make some mistakes that are going to be a little bit frustrating. But I do think adding Keandre Lambert-Smith makes this just a more cohesive group. I think it makes it make more sense. I think it gives Cam Coleman and Perry Thompson an older guy to learn from and to kind of gain knowledge from. So I think it makes a ton of sense for both sides, not only on the football field, but off it as well. And then you go to Simeon Barrow Jr., someone who is a huge player at Michigan State. In fact, I have another one of his teammates here in a second. But Miami needed some players on defense, pretty much period. They needed them kind of across the defense, but especially on that interior, that defensive line. Getting Barrow Jr. is a huge help. When you have someone like Ruben Bain rushing on the edge, I think you need someone to be able to force a problem for the quarterback, whether that's collapsing the pocket and forcing him to leave the pocket, making it easier for an edge rusher to get that sack or what have you. I think it's going to unlock Ruben Bain a lot if they can get push on that interior, and Simeon Barrow Jr. can absolutely get push on that interior. So Miami, I think, in my opinion, saw that gaping hole sitting at the top of the ACC and said, let's go pick up some big-time players. And they got two of the best pickups of this last class, and I don't necessarily think they're done. I think there's definitely still some guys out there, one on this list, that they definitely will be in for down the road. But let's move right along, go to another running back. Dylan Edwards coming over from Colorado to Kansas State is absolutely huge. I think Kansas State, one of the issues with their team, as I kind of went through it, was it felt like from a playmaking perspective, at least with their legs, it felt like Avery Johnson was going to be the big-time player. DJ Giddens is fantastic and will be a great player for them. But when you talk about, spreading defenses out, getting out into open field, making those wow plays, it felt like Avery Johnson was the guy, and there wasn't much around him. Dylan Edwards is one of the best playmakers in the entire country. Whether it's running the ball or catching the ball out of the backfield is really where he does most of his work, but that attack just became much more lethal. I think when you look at Utah and Kansas State have been the teams that we've kind of compared against each other because they're the top of the Big 12 as I see it. And Utah has the edge at a large number of the positions. I think they have, overall as a roster, probably a better roster than Kansas State. But there's a real argument to be made that Kansas State has the two best playmakers between those two teams. When you talk about Avery Johnson and you talk about Dylan Edwards, they can do things on the football field that, frankly, no one on Utah can do. So it'll be fascinating to watch that unfold if that game ends up happening in Arlington, as I kind of expect it to happen. But we'll see what happens there. I think it'll be really, really interesting. And then we talked about another Michigan State guy. That is Derek Harmon, someone that has committed to Oregon. Michigan State got absolutely gutted, but Derek Harmon and Simeon Barrow Jr. are about as big as they come. And I think Oregon has to feel just incredible about their D-line. They felt pretty good about it before Derek Harmon joined, but now it's one of the best in the entire country. Him and Jamari Caldwell on the inside is just going to be insane and will help them immensely in that Big 12 title run, maybe even a national championship run for the Ducks, but an absolutely huge pickup for Dan Lanning there. And then you have Tyler Barron, the only one on this list that has not made a decision. I think Miami has the inside track here, but he was at USC a weekend ago, so it'll be really interesting to see this one unfold. Wherever he goes, he can be a huge help. He is super long, can be helpful in the pass rush and run defense. I think he would just be an awesome, awesome piece for any one of these teams. I think if you add him to Miami across from Ruben Bain, it's going to be a scary group over there. And then at the 9 position, I have Branson Hickman, the O-lineman that came from SMU over to Oklahoma. I think this is mainly just you need the offensive lineman, and they got one of the best ones from a year ago. Hickman was one of the highest rated offensive linemen from a year ago and did just incredible work in the AAC, and now he's taken a little bit of a step up, and I think he's going to be capable of doing that, will likely be a starter right away, and they need him to hit because this offensive line is skeptical at best, I guess is probably the way to put it. I think there are a lot of OU fans that are cautiously optimistic about it, but there's definitely still some worry. But bringing in Branson Hickman is about as big of a pickup as Brent Venables and company could have possibly hoped for. And then you get to Deion Hayes, the edge rusher from Pitt. This kid, I think, is just much like Oklahoma. Colorado desperately needed defensive help, and they desperately needed pass rushing help, and Deion Hayes can absolutely be that guy. Was an absolute game wrecker at Pitt a year ago. I think he will start immediately and be a huge part of their success. They've done a really good job overall just adding to that defensive side of the ball. Him and BJ Green is going to be one of the best pass rushing duos in the entire country, to be totally honest with you. So it'll be really interesting to watch this team unfold. Deion did, what Deion does, right? He brought in a ton of really talented kids during this past portal class, but Deion Hayes really took the cake as far as I'm concerned. And then you have some honorable mentions. Jason Zandamela absolutely could have been on this list, but not exactly sure what his role is going to be this year. He could be a starter, he could not be, not exactly sure there. Peyton Woodyard is going to be a very, very talented kid. I don't know what his role is this year. Kind of the same thing as Jason Zandamela, but the kid is outright talented, and no matter what, he is going to make an impact for Oregon at some point. Then you have Jacoby Matthews, who's still sitting out there. It sounds like Washington and Colorado are still very much in contact, but I haven't heard a ton over the last couple of days about him. And then Elijah Badger is going to be huge for wherever he ends up. I think it's going to be Florida. He's kind of in between Florida and Arizona. He did visit Washington, but it doesn't seem like they're going to be in on this kid, so whoever picks him up is going to absolutely love him. I would lean Florida, but you never know, right? But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, we invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly ask for. We have so many new shows coming out, so many sports covered, and we have great people covering all of them. So definitely check out all of the shows on the GSMC Sports Network. We have you covered for everything you could possibly need in the world of sports. So thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a